You know, every once in a while, a moment hits the financial system so quietly, but so explosively, that by the time the average person realizes what's actually happened, the opportunity's already gone. And right now, we are standing in middle of one of those moments. Not someday, not soon. I mean, literally, this Monday, December 15th, when the CME officially launches its spot quoted XRP futures. And the craziest part about this isn't happening in a vacuum, right? It is happening the exact same moment that XRP now has 5 live US spot ETFs accumulating real supply every single day. That's Bitwise, Frankie, Canary, Grayscale, and the Rex Osprey Fund. And we got the newest 21 shares product, which is moving into an approved status this month or possibly early January. This is not a coincidence. This is a coordinated shift. And let me say this a little bit differently so you really understand what's going on here. 5 ETFs are vacuuming up real XRP. The CME is launching institutional futures on Monday. Ripple is building settlement rails and RLUSD corridors. And your over-the-counter supply, it's tightening. And right now, 99% of investors, they have absolutely no clue about what's about to happen, right? If you think this is just another bullish headline, you're missing the entire magnitude of what CME futures, what they actually mean. So let me tell you a story, a real story, about what happened the last time the CME did this. When the CME launched Bitcoin futures in December of 2017, Bitcoin's open interest went from $0 to over 635 million in just the first phase of the adoption, phase 1. Within a few years, CME became the #1 Bitcoin futures market in the world, beating Binance, Bybit, everybody. Institutional volume grew so large that BlackRock literally cited CME data as a core reason as to why they launched a Bitcoin ETF. And what happened? Ask yourself this question. What happened to Bitcoin's price after CME futures matured? It didn't climb slowly. It broke through every ceiling that people didn't think was possible. 20K, 40K, 60K, $100,000, $120,000. Because the global financial system, they finally had the tools it needed to adopt it. Ethereum, it followed the exact same pattern, everyone. CME futures launched, options then launched, your future ETFs launched, and then you got spot ETFs approved. This pipeline that we're running through, this isn't a theory. This pipeline is the institutional adoption curve. And the exact same pipeline officially that's about to be opened for XRP come Monday, December 15th. No, this is not a drill. This is not a rumor. This is not hopium. This is the biggest derivatives exchange on earth saying, we are ready for institutional XRP exposure. And the moment that happens, everything changes. Let me tell you why. CME futures, they're not created for retail. They don't care about retail. They are engineered for your hedge funds, your pension funds, your treasury desk, your global liquidity providers, your market makers, your arbitrage desk, and your high frequency trading firms. These players don't trade futures for fun, everyone. They use futures to manage billions, even trillions of dollars in flow. When CME lists a product, it's because there is already institutional demand strong enough to justify the infrastructure. They're not going to waste their time on some meme coin or some altcoin that the institutions don't care about. You cannot run a spot quoted future market like XRP without real inventory. It's literally impossible. Someone must hold the XRP. Someone must buy the XRP. Someone must hedge with XRP. Someone must arbitrage spot versus futures. Someone must flatten exposure with real positions. These someones that I'm referring to, it's not retail. These someones are the same firms that moved Bitcoin CME open interest to over $5.5 billion, making Bitcoin one of the most institutionally traded assets on earth. Now, I want you to ask yourself this question. What happens when those exact same liquidity engines are pointed at XRP? What happens when arbitrage firms like Jump, DRW, Cumberland, GSR, who I talk about a lot on this channel, and Jane Street began running delta neutral strategies that require millions of XRP? What happens when your ETF activity increases? Because now futures allow them to hedge. What happens when custodians tighten liquidity supply because ETFs keep removing supply? And then ask yourself this one and last final question. What happens when over-the-counter desk, when they run out of spare XRP that institutions quietly buy behind the scenes? You get a liquidity vacuum, folks. That's what's going to happen. This is exactly what Bitcoin experienced right before its biggest run. This is what Ethereum experienced before its institutional breakout. But with XRP, it's even more dramatic, because XRP isn't just an investment asset. It's built for settlement. You don't settle global payments with Bitcoin's volatility. You don't settle Swift level flows with 5-minute confirmation times. And you definitely do not bridge global currencies with gas fee spikes, everyone. You settle with something that is stable, that is fast, that is neutral, that is liquid, and that is predictable. That is XRP. And now with five spot ETFs already live and doing very well, and your CME futures launching this Monday, XRP is stepping into this exact moment where your speculation ends and your integration begins. This is where the price conversation, this is where it changes. Not because of hype, not because of silly meme coins, not because of bull run energy, but because the math behind it becomes unavoidable. When Bitcoin CME futures matured and ETF demand kicked in, supply on exchanges dropped by over 30%. Over-the-counter desks, they dried up. Price had no choice but to adjust upward, because institutional demand, it does not negotiate, folks. Institutions don't say, oh, the price ran up, I'm gonna wait for a dip. Institutions say, our allocation is 2%, now execute. This is the future that XRP is walking into. But here's the wild part about all this. Compared to Bitcoin, XRP has a fraction of the available liquid supply. Ripple's escrow is predictable. Circulating supply is known. Exchange float, it's smaller. Over-the-counter reserves, super limited. And now ETFs are removing supply permanently. If Bitcoin's supply shock made it run to $69,000, what do you think happens to an asset that's designed for settlement flows when demand is institutional, when ETF is a main driver and is utility driven? That's not a rally. That is a structural repricing, because the moment supply becomes bottlenecked, the price doesn't rise in a straight line, it jumps. That's how commodities behave when demand outruns supply. And XRP, it's now entering that exact same territory. 5-spot ETFs accumulating, CME futures demanding hedging, market makers needing inventory, over-the-counter supply, it's tightening. Ripple corridors, they're all forming. RLUSD is anchoring payment rails, and banks and fintechs are finally starting to integrate. This is the blueprint of a full-on institutional adoption. And I'm telling you right now, in every cycle, there is a moment that becomes obvious only in hindsight. That moment where people look back on and they say, oh my God, the entire setup was right in front of us that entire time. For Bitcoin, that moment was CME. For Ethereum, that moment was CME. And for XRP, that moment is Monday, when the CME flips the switch and XRP spot futures, they go live. The world's biggest financial machine is quietly preparing to use XRP, not as a trade, everyone, but as infrastructure. And when the financial system adopts something as infrastructure, the price doesn't inch up. It resets to reflect its new role. Remember, these institutions, they do not care about you, retail. They want to accumulate everything that you have. When you look at a combination of the CME and these spot ETFs, so we got spot futures, spot ETFs, all which we need to acquire millions beyond millions of XRP, you are going to run into a supply shortage. There is going to be a reset, a major reset, folks. Now, whether that's today or next week, all we know is that it is happening. And I do believe we are witnessing the beginning of that reset right now. I hope you enjoyed. Get ready for Monday. It's going to be a fun day. It's going to be an amazing end to the year. As always, hit that thumbs up, show the channel some love, and I'll see all y'all on the next one.